everyone. Welcome to episode 298. We are closing in quickly on 300 of This Is Whole Life. And this week, we welcome Pastor Ken back to the studio, Pastor Jeff. Everyone is back. And this week, we were talking about a rise to Old Testament spiritual justice. And I wasn't really sure what that meant until we got into the message. And then Ken gave us a 60-second synopsis, which I was really impressed, I believe. But according to my watch, you finished way early on the 60 seconds.
Did it in about 45 seconds?
Yeah, I think it was about 42, 43, something like that. So you were spot on.
I gave myself a little extra time just in case, you know.
Well, we're used to it because here when Ken will come in, we'll tape the podcast, and then we'll go and we'll do a little promo for something upcoming, and Ken will say, I think I can do that. And it's almost like Name That Tune. Ken starts at about a minute and goes, I can do that in 45 and do it better. Yeah. And he's like, what would be better, the 35 version? And then down it goes to 35, and he smiles, and he just goes, that's it, I'm done. And he's like George Costanza. He wants to leave on the high note. Exactly. Don't say another word, just walk out the door. And it works. Drop the mic, it works. But before we get started today, Matt, here it is. Ken is back. We are going to get to your question.
Jeff is back.
Jeff is back. Because Jeff might end up answering this question.
This question's from when again?
This was from January 29th.
January 29th. What's today's day?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I know. So we're a little bit behind. But
man,
Bernie and I
blame you, so you know.
You should.
I do.
You should. Because
Matthew, it's not Jeff and I's fault. We wanted to answer this question a long time ago, and it was just like,
if we had only known.
Yeah. So it is what it is. But
and Bernie says I owe him lunch. So
yeah, you do.
Matt, get in touch with me.
Don't stop asking, Matt.
Yeah, don't stop asking because we're
on top of Randy from here on out. Your answers will be there. In fact, I say that we give you priority.
That's it. That's it. You go to the front of the line because I now have access to the chat roll, and I was just on there before.
Don't make excuses. Just ask the question. Let's get this done. Let's not take any chances.
Okay, so going back to January 29th, this was our Arise with God's Spirit message, and the question was, how do we know the growth areas we need to obey in?
How do we know the growth areas we need to obey in? I think that's such a great question because the fact of the matter is that we all have blind spots in our life, right? I mean, and the problem with a blind spot is you don't know it's a blind spot because you don't know it's there. If you knew it was a blind spot, you'd work on it, right?
I hope so.
And so I think that one of the good things that God does for all of us is he doesn't change us all at once. I think it would be pretty overwhelming if God laid it on you, all the things that were not right in your life and all the problems and all the ways you need transformation. I think it'd be a little bit overwhelming. The good news is God chisels away. Just like with when you're sculpting something, it's not fast, and he sculpts. He takes what you can handle. And so, Matt, how do you know what God's trying to take? He'll take it.
Ooh,
you'll know it. He'll speak to you. You'll feel your conscience. You'll have people around you. Often, the people that God surrounds me with are His chosen instruments for helping me learn what's needing to go. But people say to you, well, you really hurt me when you did this, or you're a little bit harsh, or hey, could you, and those are times where I just try to, if you can set aside defensiveness, and just ask God to allow you to be changed, that's where real growth will take place. But generally speaking, like I said, for me, my experience in life is that God usually does a pretty good job of laying in front of me the things that I need to change when I need to change them.
Yeah. One of the things, Matt, if you look at that question, the question is, how do I know the things that I need? Sometimes we don't, like Ken said, that's a blind spot, but a lot of times if we have our eyes open to the needs of others first, and we see somebody else that may need our help or are serving them, it helps us to kind of get a better grip in terms of what's going on inside. Because you'll see a lot of stuff and resistances and all those kinds of things that pop up whenever you start to realize that I'm taking focus off myself, and then I'm looking and I'm seeing better when I see things from myself.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is it's going to be difficult.
Yes, the answers were easy.
The answers are,
for instance, one of the things I would guess that, Matt, that God's working on in your life is patience. because it took us so long to get to this. This must be one of the things that God is working on.
Trust us.
I don't know, Matt. I don't know it all. I'm just joking with you. So,
my
but
goodness.
we are sorry for taking so long to get to this question. It was a really good one.
It is a good question. And this week, I think I know we're going to have more questions, because even just in the Q&A, there was a lot of people firing off questions that they wanted answered. And to start with, I had questions right off the bat, because when you said justice and righteousness were the same thing, we were talking biblically.
Yeah.
And at face value, in our current vernacular, I'm like, it
doesn't really pair
You can't
up
hear
well.
me. My head's by the microphone. I'm scratching my head like you can see me doing this, but you probably can't hear it either.
I just thought you were pulling your hair there for a second.
I
pulling
can't
his
do
hair
it. I
out.
can't do it. But I did look them up in the dictionary, and actually they're closer than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Justice, just behavior or treatment, the quality of being fair and reasonable, the administration of the law or authority in maintaining this, and then righteousness, the quality of being morally right or justifiable. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe it didn't. Maybe everyone else was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I was completely surprised, and I didn't think it was that close. You kind of set it up that politics are borrowing these words. These are not words that they haven't, that they created. These are things they're co-opting of themselves and then using them as dividers in our culture. So I just didn't feel like those two even belong together. And then even past that, and then you brought in Mishpat and
Sadek.
I knew I was going to get that one wrong. I wrote it down and I was like, I should spell it like it.
I say it with confidence, but that's just.
Is it? Jeff, do you have a
Sadek?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. That's the better.
Is it? Okay. But both of those, when you think of those two things as you presented them, Mishpat was giving people what they are due, whether punishment or protection or care. That's a different idea of justice than exists in my world or in my immediate thought of, well, what's justice?
What do you immediately think of when you think of justice?
Immediately, is it kind of that eye for an eye?
Yeah.
And
kind of has to do more with punishment than it does with giving people what they're,
or
even
balancing the scales.
Okay.
Or I listen to a lot of true crime and wrongfully convicted people podcasts where you think, man, these people just need some justice. Like the person that you can pretty clearly see probably did it, or, we need to clear this up, and you get angry and that this is such an injustice that someone is sitting in prison. And I know and most of us don't know probably somebody personally in prison, but we've heard of stories. And then but giving people what they are due, and one of those things that can be due is protection or care. That raises the bar on kind of what I should be thinking about when I'm thinking about justice of any kind, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It goes all the way across.
Yeah.
Man. And then Sadek?
We'll have Jeff, our Hebrew speaking.
we don't, it's, who knows what they spoke back then, right? In Hebrew.
But you said
I've found that the best way to do it is just say it with confidence.
And people,
and about 98%, 99% of the people out there won't know the difference anyway. So,
and eventually it'll be changed.
I can barely pronounce my own name. So it's
But Sadek said, day-to-day living in which a person conducts all relationships with fairness, generosity, and equity. Oh, but then you also went on to immediately say, well, the Jews couldn't get this right, and the only way they could get it right was by Jesus coming to impart salvation.
I think it's important, and I think it's important to say it's not just the Jews who can't get it right. It's every single one of us. Nobody can get this right, and that's kind of one of the points that Jesus makes as we hear him speaking in the Gospels, is that only he was able to get it right.
But for us now, that was what I immediately thought too, was, well, we like to think that we are smarter and that, because we have the story of Jesus and we have his legacy to look at, his ministry to look at, and how he interacted with people. And of course, right down the center, he does it just right all the time, every time. And I think to myself, man, when you got to, well, let's see, protection, maybe care, I don't know, or fairness, generosity, and equity. It's tough to know what those things are sometimes when there's a lot of bad things that happen in our world, and there's a lot of bad things that have happened to people that we all know. And when you're kind of invested in that person and you see their pain, and maybe you only know one side of it because you never met the other person, but clearly I can think of, I was just in my head like 5, 6, 7 people that have had things that have caused other people to serve jail time, major offenses, and how it has just devastated their lives and made them almost incapable of maybe what someone would call normalcy, or to be able to have normal relationships, and then you go, I know it applies to everyone. So, but then you're going to say generosity and equity and fairness.
Yeah.
And how do we know what God's idea of fairness or equity or generosity would be when we deal with some of these situations, when we're trying to maybe help? Maybe it's us. Maybe this has happened to us, and we need to think about those. That seems like a really tall bag to fill.
Yeah, this is such a. I mean, as I was listening to Ken speak, it is such a good study, and I was so glad that you said that. For us to understand the New Testament, we really have to understand the Old Testament. And the Old Testament understanding of justice is actually so much more like Christ when you really tease it out and study it, because that's what Christ was saying when he says, you have heard this and you have heard, but I say. What he's really doing is he's bringing in these two factions that we have split up, and we said eye for an eye is the only Old Testament justice. And that's not true, and that's what Jesus is saying. We did these things so that you could feel a sense of maybe security, maybe a sense of balance in your life, but man, you got to realize equitability was much more of what Jesus was talking about too, in his mercy, saying the law was set up not so that you guys could, basically prosper. That's not what the law was set up so that we could all live in community and understand God's deeper sides rather than just prosperity.
I think that one of the just so important things to remember is that the God of the Old Testament is also the God of the New Testament. So when Jesus shows up and says, you've heard it said, but I say to you, Jesus is the one who gave the law in the Old Testament, and there's this tendency to think that somehow Jesus is overriding, but what I really think Jesus is trying to say is, you've heard your teachers interpret it this way, but this is what I meant when I said it, just so you know, this is what I meant, and this is what I was trying to say to you. I did this because of your hard hearts. He says that in another place. I allow you to do this, but that wasn't what I was trying to because I understand the reality of human life. And I think that's one of the things that we often as human, we apply Scripture in a pretty harsh way when Jesus himself understood the realities. Jesus was trying to say is, hey, there is a best way of doing things, and I've let you know what it is. But when you fall short, I also get that. I get that human life is not easy and that there are not easy. And I get that you have hard hearts. And guess what? There's mercy and grace there for you as well. So Jesus is incredible. And in the Old Testament is so much better than most people give it credit for. You hear about, it's the Old Testament God, this, that, and other. Same one. Same God, both places. And what happens is we get spiritually lazy in our study, and we don't really look into what's really happening in those chapters where things happen that we don't like to hear or like to see, and we don't read the whole Bible in its full context and really see what's going on. As I said a couple months ago, I think when we were talking about Jonah, Jonah knew exactly who God was. That's why he didn't want to go to Nineveh. He didn't want to go to Nineveh. He didn't want to go because he said, I know exactly who you are. You're slow to anger and great in mercy, and I just don't want that to happen to these bozos over here. And so, that's one of the things I think we have to recognize, that the same God that's in the Old Testament is the same God in the New Testament, and vice versa. And to truly get some of the depth of what Jesus is trying to say, you have to understand some of the Old Testament scriptures that he's quoting from.
I get that part too, and I know that I can hear someone in the back saying, "Yeah, but Lord, what about the Old Testament God where?" And I just had his name in it. His two sons, they tried to keep the Ark of the Covenant from falling over. That was the priest, right? The priest's sons.
You're talking about
Was it?
No, you made my brain freeze too.
No,
but it wasn't actually the two sons. It was you're talking about when David was bringing the Ark of the Covenant into,
and they tried to keep it from falling over, and they immediately died.
Do you remember
Hophni and
No. That's Eli's sons.
Eli's sons. Yeah. I knew Eli's sons, but I couldn't. And that's what those are the names.
This is like basic Pathfinder trivia.
Pathfinder Bowl.
So
yeah.
I know, right? Believe I'm blanking out on the moment, but yes.
If you take that story and then you take like Lot's wife, don't turn back,
right?
And everyone can go think about a place that you loved, that you lived, and even though it was evil, and the angel said, "Don't look back," and all these different stories in the Bible of just seemingly. You were told not to. I mean, the instructions were there, but in the case of the ark, it's like, well, but it was going to fall and it was going to break, and that would have been tragic. And so I'm going to save it. I'm going to be the hero. And it's like, you're dead, and
justice.
The evil, the quick hand of justice.
Right.
Or you're turning around for one last look at your beloved home, and you turn into a pillar of salt. And
boy, that feels like a good pick. It feels like a good topic for when it's time to come up with sermons for me to preach on, right? It was like, what was the series that we call that? We're doing that
and
again.
That's not just Old Testament. Then you got the story of Ananias and Sapphira.
Yep. So I think
same
that's
thing
where
happens there. Essentially, they're both dropped for lying.
Right.
And that one I almost get. I mean, I'm not saying I don't get, but no. But but really, it's always the ark, right? I mean, the ark is just like, well. We're not, again, you're not trusting God to just do what God wanted to do or knew would happen and knew in this case. And so it just seems tough to draw those conclusions that it's the same God and the same, like the same rules apply when it doesn't always seem that way.
Yeah.
And
this is not me trying to justify what happened there because I don't have to, and God doesn't have to either for that matter. But I think one of the things I take out of that story is just that a lot of times I try to defend God when I don't need to. I'm trying to save God's reputation when God's pretty perfectly. I mean, you think about that thing tipping over really wasn't, if you believe that God is all powerful and created earth and all this good stuff, he probably can take care of his own ark when it's teetering around. On the other hand, you got to feel for the guy because you can totally relate to just sticking out your hand.
Just to stop
it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's I feel like that's probably a good sermon.
Yeah, there's so many things that play in all of those. You're right. And we probably should have a sermon series on these weird happenings that always get attributed to God, by the way. But you also have to realize that Jesus called that kind of thing sleeping. Too, we have to realize, too, that death is not the final punishment, and death is not that final.
So there's lessons in there somewhere.
Well, there may be.
Right?
I'm just saying that there's lots of factors.
I think as human beings, when we read a lot of this, we do take, what we don't know is what people's eternal fates are. And as human beings, probably very understandably, we take death to be the worst thing that possibly can happen to a person, when that's not what Jesus taught. Jesus taught that there's something worse than dying here on this earth, and it was basically not choosing to be in a relationship that will last for eternity with him. And so I think that
reframing that then.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that God takes a dim view of is injustice. And when we are hurting those around us, and so a lot of times in the Old Testament, when we see things happening, we don't take into account the injustice that's been going on there. In just the same way that most, I've changed my position on the death penalty over the years. I used to be in favor of it. I used to think it was a good idea. I'm not there anymore. And the reason I'm not there is not because I don't think that there's a place for the death sentence. And now I'm going to get myself in trouble with those of you who have a feeling strong one way or the other. But I'll just be honest where I'm at with it is because we live in such an imperfect system. I think it's very easy to, once you take a life, you can't give it back. So that's my hang up with if we worked in a perfect justice system, for me, there are some people that do some things that is just probably not good for them to be in society, because they're just going to keep hurting and maiming and taking other people's lives and ruining lives. left and right. And it's not that I want to see something terrible happen to them, but I also don't want to see something terrible happening to innocent people and so while I will go down the road of not wanting to see capital punishment happening because I think we live in an imperfect justice system that has a proven track record of discriminating, and we take the life of the marginalized far more than we do of those in power positions. That, two people commit murder, the same murder. If you are in a more privileged situation, you're far less likely to get the death penalty in the first place. So that's where kind of my hang up is with things. But when I look at it, we have to understand that there's sometimes where, from my viewpoint, I think that God had to do some things to protect innocent people. And it's not something that he enjoys or likes, but there are things that really matter when it comes to God caring about his children. It's just like, if one of my children is abusing my other child, I want to do something to stop it, to prevent it.
Well, I think justice too, I think more and more people are kind of becoming aware of, and they're being exposed to through many different mediums, podcasts being one of them, of what our criminal justice system really is about. It's not even, in a lot of cases, it's not even being hidden anymore. Things can be fabricated and people can be sent to jail for basically nothing. There's thousands of cases out there. And like you said, when maybe there's something that would people that are so tormented inside, it might even be doing them a favor if they were not here. But
when I lived in Nashville, and here's something I want people to, I want you to kind of put yourself in the situation really quickly. If you are pro death penalty, I want you to think for a second, where are you at when it's somebody that matters to you? And that's one of the things that's really kind of changed my perspective. I've had some people that have been very close to me that have done undoubtedly some things that were really wrong. And what I really wanted was for the system to give them another chance. Now, I don't have that same mercy on somebody I don't know, or somebody who's doing something to me. But I remember up in Nashville, we had he was the only Seventh-day Adventist elder behind bars on death row. This guy was on death row. He became an Adventist after he admitted that he had murdered his wife brutally. He went to prison, became a Seventh-day Adventist in prison, was so active in bringing people to Jesus in prison that one of the Adventist churches in Nashville that had been working with him made him an elder in their church.
Wow.
So that he could officially be doing what he was doing behind bars. And his time for execution came up. And it was amazing to me how many people who were in the pro-death penalty camp wanted to see him go ahead and have his sentence commuted down to life because they knew him. They knew what he was doing. They knew he'd changed his life around. But if you don't know the person, then it changes things for you. And so I think one of the things we have to do is we look at positions that we hold and that we hold dear to ourselves is just ask ourselves, if I was in that position, how would I feel about it? If it was somebody that I really loved, that doesn't mean that we change our mind on things, or it doesn't. But what it does mean is it at least gives us a little bit more empathy for people out there who are going through things. And it's really easy to, on the justice side of things, really go over onto an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth when we don't have empathy. But when we do have empathy, we start doing things like what Jesus said, which was turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
And looking for ways to show mercy and to be merciful as our Father in heaven is. And again, what I'm not trying to make is a case for any one particular thing. Whatever people believe, that's think about it and believe it. That's work on whatever you think. But I do think that again, that as a society, we have really done a poor job in recent years of practicing empathy and thinking about where you would come down were you in that situation or somebody that you love.
Well, I think too the problem is we make assumptions about everybody in jail is guilty, and that's I'll say it with confidence, that's not true. Maybe of some things, and then the the old adage of, well, if they weren't guilty of that, they probably did something else and they're just getting time for that. And it's like, well, that's not the way our justice system is supposed to work. And then number 2, 3, when you see there's a lot of shows, a lot of media that are showing, and one of them being it's a podcast called Ear Hustle, which is actually produced by the inmates of San Quentin Prison. Mm-hmm. And if you've never listened to it, I mean, obviously these are incarcerated people, so there's a lot of language and colorful stories and things that go on in prison that, you know, wouldn't be for the young at ears. But it's true life. And to me, there's been a lot of changing of my mind when you start to hear people that, oh, so-and-so started this program and they believed in me and then I wanted to be better. Or this guy was, you know, big, tough, whatever, and he came and just kept his nose clean. And he taught people how to play guitar. He killed 3 people and he knows he can't ever do anything about it except just become a better person. And it's like, horrific things, but would you be the guy that's going like, yeah, we need to put that guy to death? And you're thinking, no, he's changed and maybe he doesn't deserve to get out. That's a question for the system and whatever. But it just seems like there's an immediate, and we do it every day to other people too, where it's just like we make this assumption and well, that's what it is. And then like you said, you kind of push them off to the side. Then it doesn't give us a chance to get to know them. It doesn't give a chance for us to maybe be friends and find out more or find out if there's a way that we could come alongside them like Bernie talked about last week and walk through the crowd with them. And I just thought that these 2 things were.
You guys, do you remember hearing the story about the judge who was sentencing a guy that had stolen a loaf of bread in a town? This guy, it's an old preacher story that I've heard a billion different times. But, you know, this judge is sentencing a guy he stole a loaf of bread, and when the judge asked the guy why he did it, he said, it's because I'm hungry and I'm broke and I don't have any money and I needed to feed my family. And so the judge fines every person in the courtroom like $1 or $5 for living in a town that would allow somebody to be hungry to the point that they had to steal food.
Oh, no.
And then they used that money to pay this man's fine for what he did. And I just tell that story because going back to righteousness and justice, we often go ahead and blame people for things that, yes, were their decision. Did that man have to steal the loaf of bread? He did not have to. But we also sometimes don't take the responsibility we ought to take for allowing societal injustice to take place and create a society where people find themselves in impossible situations that are hard for us to even begin to imagine if we haven't lived through them.
So how do we or should we balance our relationship with God and our relationship with others? You said the weightier issues are justice, mercy, and faithfulness.
I didn't actually say that.
Didn't you?
I didn't.
I wrote it. I typed it out as you were saying it. Did I get it wrong?
Well, no, I didn't say that. I was quoting someone.
Were you? Who was you quoting?
I was quoting Jesus. Just to be clear. Just to be clear.
I was like, I'm pretty sure.
I did say that.
You did say that. No.
I was reading it, and I think that's important. I think that one of the things I would like to hope is that when I'm saying things, I'm hoping that I'm not just giving you my opinion on something, but I'm sharing with you what the Bible is saying. And to me, when Jesus says something, that's even more important there. But yeah, Jesus says the weightier issues. That's not Ken saying that. Jesus says that. And for me, what that tells me is that, yeah, it goes back to the parenting metaphor that I used a little earlier. If you are kind and loving to my children, and you're kind of a little bit mean to me, it's a lot easier than if you're kind to me and you're mean to my kids.
Yeah.
Which is not saying that I want people to be mean to me, and it's not saying that God is saying, oh, it's okay to be disrespectful to him or not be loving to him. But if you are mean to God's kids, God cares about that. God, being not a selfish being, cares when others are being mean to his children, to the people that he created. And so I think it's just incredibly important for us to remember that. I just think that sometimes in Christianity we get so wrapped up in doing what's right in our personal relationship with God.
Yeah,
and I really kind of almost rebel a little against that word personal relationship with God, because I'm just not sure that there is a relationship with God outside of community. That this idea that it's just me and God that matters. You just don't see that in the Bible. You just don't see it there. That our relationship with God is important, but what's happening in the world around us and how we're responding to the world around us tells us what kind of relationship we have with God in the first place.
Introverts are typing questions for next week's episode right now.
Good, right away.
They're like, personal. I can only handle me and God. I can't handle anybody else.
Let's also, Jeff can speak to this a little bit more. But being an introvert or extrovert is all about where you get your energy from. It's not so much about whether you like or dislike people,
or just like community.
Yeah.
I mean, introverts and extroverts are all part of the community.
Sure, yeah.
And that's, you're right. Energy and the experience of drawing in or drawing out, how I internalize or externalize my relationships, still you are all needing community. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I don't think God can be understood outside of community.
And that's one of the reasons when people say, "Oh, I can have a relationship with God without going to church. I don't need church." That's where I'm like, yes and no. Do you have to go to church to be in a relationship with God? No. But is church part of having a relationship with God? I think it is. I think it's part of being in community. And all too often, we run away from the pain of community when the pain of community is one of the tools I believe God uses to transform our characters and make us better people. So,
no, it's hard to come back though to a community where you've been hurt. So that's
incredibly
definitely
hard.
Yeah, and I think the Old Testament actually was God's attempt to try to create community to invite other nations into. I mean, it wasn't about an exclusivity or finding a club that they're the only going to be the favored ones, but this was about God creating. This is what real community looks like,
at least until the promised land, right?
Well, let me go ahead and give you a little preview of this week's sermon based on the Promised Land comment. Everybody in between now and this next Saturday when I'm preaching, go grab a map of the world and look at where the Holy Land is located, where Israel is located. And if you really want to get some extra credit, go and look up Google just what was significant about there. And I'll just go ahead and quickly tell you, but go look and see if I'm making this up. God didn't pick the promised land randomly. In other words, he didn't say to Abraham, "Hey, go to this land," because he's like, it's some free space there, or there's some people I hate there, so you go there and wipe them out. That's not what God did. God sent Abraham to a place where if his descendants had gone there and populated the way he had dreamed God had wanted them to, they were right in the middle of the prime trade routes of the known world at that time. In other words, everything came through there. Everything. It was smack dab in a place where every kind of trade was going to have to come through that place to funnel to any other place in the world, in the known world at that point. And so what becomes so important about this is that if they had been sharing the gospel like they should have been, it would have gone out to the entire world from there. It would have gone everywhere because everything was coming through. But instead of believing that it was for sharing, they believed it was for hoarding, the same way that Christians do today. So we're not any better. Nobody's any better. But, it's like the Christianity that I've seen that, and I've literally seen this, where in one of the cities I worked in, we had somebody who put up billboards around the city that were something to the effect of turn or burn kind of things. It was like, if you don't do this or this, you're going to hell. And the person was approaching me like, "Hey, not probably a great tactic for bringing people to Jesus." And they said, and the comment was, "Well, they've been warned." They've been warned.
Ow.
Well, have they? Have they been warned? Is that how you think Jesus would want them to be warned? So there's a lot of ways that we think that we're spreading the gospel when in fact we're probably more like crushing it out of people and putting burdens on them that are incredibly hard for them to bear rather than walking alongside them in community. And that's what God had in mind when he put his people in the promised land. He's putting them in this place where they could have been this huge blessing to the world around. The whole world would have had to come through there and they've been like, "Wow, look at this nation. Look at how amazing things are for them." And if their God is that great, don't we want him? And so God's goal was never to create just one place for his people. It was to spread it out to the entire world.
If only they had embraced tent revivals I'm
sure that would have been the ticket.
That would have been it. Well, of course, we probably wouldn't be here doing this podcast.
Have you ever done a tent revival?
I have been to – I've never been to a tent revival. I've been to more Daniel and Revelation seminars than I –
Well, I've done both of those. When I was in high school, I did a tent revival with my pastor. I got to preach in it. He had me wearing a white dinner jacket with a black bow tie.
Black bow tie?
In a tent. With people singing on hay.
Another image.
Tell me there's pictures from this event.
Not that you can find.
By the way, if any Ken's friends are listening, it's podcast at WholeLife.Church. Send those pictures in, and I'll promise I'll send you something really nice. No, just kidding. No, that is, I've heard that from not said quite so eloquently, but more in a kind of a thrown together, this is kind of what I believe in that same scenario. And it always makes me wonder why we try to keep it to ourselves, or is it that we can't agree on one message that we can send because either we have to be turn and burn, or we have to be, it's a free for all. You do what you want. Once saved, always saved. There's all these different catchphrases on all the sides of this. And is it just that we can't get together with a unified message that just says Jesus loves you, he will figure everything out, and just, come and hang out and just let us love you, let him love you, and we could probably make that work, but we just don't. I don't it just seems like
we're humans, Randy, so we're working on it.
Doggone it.
Fortunately, Whole Life is an amazing place, and we would definitely invite people into the crossroads of Orlando to
absolutely
come experience Jesus.
I thought that was really cool, though, that the weightier issues are justice, mercy, and faithfulness, and to just think about that versus what we get hung up on. I just thought that was one of maybe the best parts of the message.
And that really makes sense when you start thinking that justice and righteousness are synonyms, that they're the same word in that language, that it's the same idea. And so when Jesus talks about be righteous as your heavenly Father is righteous, he's talking not about some. I think we get a real distorted view of what righteousness is. Somehow we can be, just nasty people in our relationships in life. But as long as we're, keeping the 10 Commandments,
Sabbath and tithe, like you said in the message, that really rung true to me. Very true. That's an easy way to just.
I want to do a series on the 10 Commandments because they're pretty fascinating when you actually break them down. If you really start looking at the weightier issues in them, when it talks about taking God's name in vain, we usually take that to, not swearing or not actually using God's name. And all of that, I think, has its place and purpose. But I think the bigger thing that was being tried to say there is don't misrepresent God. I mean, we call ourselves Christians. And I know at that time they called themselves, there was the Jewish nation, the Israelites. But basically, if you take on God's name, when you behave in a bad way as one of God's children, you're taking his name in vain.
Oof. Yeah. Okay. Well, that I think we probably should do one on that because now I'm a little. No, how good I'm going to sleep tonight. Thanks, Ken.
You're welcome. I'm here for you.
No, seriously, that would be... The
Velvet Sledgehammer.
Well, we're about to... I had that in here somewhere. Did we miss it? Did I miss the sledgehammer this week? Because, or does that come later? Well, we'll keep reading on and we might get there. Now we're down to questions from the Q&A.
All right.
And we had a bunch. Denise asked, can you tie in Jesus' words, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and God what is God's, to today's message?
Can you tie in, give to what to Caesar is Caesar's, and to God what is God? Yeah, I think that's I think just by asking that question, you can. It's all about it. It's in in our world, there is what is political, and it deserves its due, whether it's paying your taxes as you've been asked to do, or whether it's. I honestly think that voting is an important part of my Christian duty.
Yeah.
Not for a particular party, but based on what I believe to be right, I think it's important to vote. And so I think that's part of giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God that it's God's. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers the question, but what do you think, Jeff?
I think that's actually part of how we understand justice in a community where there are people who, we all have to live in a place where we have to pay taxes. I mean, it's part of, in a sense, when I signed up to live in my neighborhood, but I also have a sense of justice on the other side. Yes, justice where everything is, I pay what is due, that part of the justice that is due something, but I also look beyond it and what is it really for? Why am I here in this community? What is this community for? And I think that's what Jesus said, what he said, pay unto Caesar's. Don't get caught up in, what you think is righteous.
Well, righteousness, right, is that relationship, the right relationship with God and a right relationship with humans. And so you could say, give unto God what is God's. That's part of righteousness, and the other part is giving to humans what they are due.
What they are due.
All right. Lachelle just had a comment, and she said, it breaks my heart when I see someone who I know to be a good church-going person treating others terribly, and it confused me so much as a child. And I really resonated with that last statement where when you really have looked up to somebody, and again, I don't take what she's saying as, throwing rocks at that person, but because we've all been that person that have treated somebody really horribly. And it just, and I think that part always resonates with me because, there's little eyes looking, there's eyes looking all over the place. And then we just immediately lose trust in people that think we might. Maybe they were under the assumption that we were somehow better than we were. I know we can look at some people and go, man, that Pastor Ken, he's really got his stuff together. I'll bet.
No, I don't think many people are thinking that.
And, and not that you want people to lift you up on some kind of pedestal, but also I think it really makes me feel good, and it makes me want to be closer to God when people say, man, that's just what I needed to hear today. And I think, if this came from your prayer time or whatever led you to say what you said or to seek me out or to do, you run into those things every so often. And you go, man, how cool is it that God used me to be a part of bringing just a little bit of joy or maybe a little bit of healing or some direction to someone. And it's just to lose that just seems like a bigger tragedy, I think, than what we often may give it credit for.
Yeah.
But
I would just say in regards to that is whenever we hear those things, that's, whenever we hear something with, boy, I really needed that. I go back to the community again. And why did I get that?
Right.
And how does that actually contribute to my community? And I think we have to look in those terms and think in those terms that it's not just about what I can get, but also what I can give in that regard.
No, I think that's totally true, and I think it makes all that studying, that time with God. Not that it's not rewarding just personally, but maybe that goes to your point, Ken. Maybe we just don't have as much of a personal relationship, or it's as important as we think until it's shared with community. And then when someone says, "Hey, you guys have really been killing it with the podcast. I've really been finding meaning. I've been finding that I listen every week, and I can't wait to listen," and things like that, and you think, well, all the time that, you prepare in sermons and we prepare to talk and we try to open up to the Holy Spirit to just let people hear what he needs them to hear. And you go, again, that is just, to me, that is really cool that God can use imperfect Randy to do something good for somebody else. And then Shay said, thank you for having this discussion, Pastor Ken. It was the truth and it was needed. So I just wanted to make sure that you step out into politics from up front and, you're opening yourself up. And, of course, WholeLife Church, you're probably in a pretty safe environment overall. But congrats, because I think that was everyone appreciated that, and that came through multiple times in our questions. So, all right, let's see. Oh, one of our WholeLife reflections asked if a large part of believing God and being obedient to God means being kind, fair, and equitable to others. How are you doing at believing and being obedient? And so that, my friend, was where I really thought we came down to kind of the rubber meets the road. How are we doing? Because that kind of throws the challenge.
It is kind of a full circle. You started with an obedient question, and now we end with an obedient question.
And you get back to it, and you just kind of go, how am I doing if this means that it's just being kind and man, life is busy and we're often too short with people. We don't spend enough time to, when we say, how you doing? We don't expect someone to actually go, I don't know. And a couple weeks ago, I had a pretty rough week. And Pastor Ken asked me how I was doing. And I was a bumbling fool for 10 minutes. And he hung out the whole time with me. And that meant the world to me. Somebody else who I didn't know, well, I know them, but didn't know they saw the whole thing, came up to me later on that night. It was downtown community. Wanted to know when we could go out and hang out. And I don't know that we've ever done that before, even though we're pretty good friends. And this week they're like, hey, we still haven't hung out yet.
That's awesome.
So that's one of those,
That's
one of
cool.
those things where, this community that we're talking about and just how we treat everything, justice. And I know today we went into criminal justice. We went into all kinds of justice. But I think it's a good rounded conversation to just think about in all aspects, how are we doing? And then our final thoughts from Ken's message. I love this. He said, if we can't learn to talk to each other down here, meaning in earth and to church, to put the political designation by the side of your name and walk into here at church with your brothers and sisters, you're going to have a hard time walking into heaven. Family, can we agree to talk about last day events and understand that it's not political discussion, but biblical discussion, respectful discussion, and conversation with each other? Respectful discussion and conversation with politics at the center. Well, I finally thought we'd put away the velvet sledgehammer, but this week we unveiled the velvet anvil. So this week, watch out if you see the Roadrunner out there. You know who's not far behind with the anvil, and just stay away from him because he gets it every single time. So
There you go.
next week, we're still in the Old Testament, but we're moving
We're going to actually talk about specific societal justice that God put in place. So when we start talking about what God actually thought societal justice ought to look like, we're going to take a look at some very specific examples of what God thought should be happening.
Cool. I like the sounds of that. So we went from politics. Now we're gonna go to societal justice. Another cool thing. I don't think since we've been at WholeLife Church, I don't think my parents have ever been. Maybe once, long time ago. It was a special event. I think it was a concert or something. My parents are coming to church with us this week.
All right.
There you go.
So they.
Well, now you've added some added pressure to me.
I know.
Okay.
I'm going to be like, see, I've been talking Ken up. Now we'll see how. See what happens. I think my mom listens to the podcast every so often. She'll comment, but I don't know.
I know my mom does. Hey, Mom.
Hey, Mom. Mrs.
What episode
Wetmore.
numbers was this?
I'm glad you asked. It's 298.
Wow.
Ooh, so we've got like two
more.
weeks because we need to do something big. Did we get Cinderella's castle yet? Or
I asked Bernie, and he made some mention. Of course, he's in Kilimanjaro, so he's of no use to us right now. And he had mentioned someone's back porch that overlooks Disney and fireworks, so that's getting closer. Nathaniel did come up with a good idea. He said maybe we could go to DuckDuck Pro and use the green screen and see what if someone has some footage of that place. We could maybe.
we're going to do a live event, though, right?
I think we have to do.
We've got to do a live event.
So before this week is over, we'll come up with something.
With a plan,
and we'll come up with somewhere.
I feel like there's got to be food involved too.
I feel like there should be. I mean,
300th episode, that's a big deal.
That's a pretty good. It's actually been in April. Will be 6 years that we've been doing the podcast.
6
big
years.
deal.
Wow.
It's a pretty. The other day on LinkedIn, someone asked, "What's your how many episodes of a podcast have you done, and how long have you been doing it?" And when I put in, no, it wasn't. It was on. I'm sorry, it was Twitter, I believe. Anyway, and they're like 300. I'm like, how long have you been doing this? I'm like, it's weekly, and they're like, you've never missed a week, and I'm like, not one. We have a couple of bonus episodes, and we did do.
We didn't miss a week. You sure?
We've never missed a week. We did the 2 weeks I was in Hawaii.
Jeff, you've missed a couple weeks.
I know I missed a lot of weeks.
Well, when he says we, he's talking about himself.
That's what I'm thinking.
I've missed a week.
Yeah,
Well, I'm thinking from the standpoint of even the podcast has always gone
every
on.
week.
It's every
Man,
week.
you're better than the mailman.
We've never missed a deadline. And the 2
Wow.
weeks I was in Hawaii, our old platform, it was not an automatic like we have now. I had to
Right.
actually go in and load it and
You did.
and I had to put all the
I'm
stuff in.
impressed.
But it was
We need to get you something golden for this event.
maybe we have some new microphones coming. And
The
maybe
golden EIB microphone.
Oh no! Maybe we can dip these in some glitter.
Oh, there we go.
Glitter. There we go.
It'd probably be.
It probably won't be good for them, but sure, why not?
That's probably within the budget to make that happen. So we'll go with that. But if you come up with something last minute that's just like, hey, this is a cool idea, or hey, guess what? I've got 3 grills and we can grill veggies and hot dogs and veggie dogs and everything else with a great view of the ocean or downtown Orlando, or
and our 5,000 fans that will flock to.
You're gonna have to have parking, I think.
Yeah, parking
And maybe validated
event parking.
Yeah, maybe valet. I don't know.
How many people showed up at our last live event?
I think we had about 25 to come through total, 25 or 30. And so then that was kind of got switched. At least we were close to where we were supposed to be. But anyway, so if you come up with another idea, if not, we're just going to do something and then we will invite you all and invite friends and all that good stuff. And so that will do it. That's next week is $299 and then $300. That's it.
All right.
So thanks for listening. As always, send in your questions, comments, and have a great week. that think we might, maybe they were under the assumption that we were somehow better than we were. I know we can look at some people and go, man, that Pastor Ken, he's really got his stuff together. I'll bet.
I don't think many people are thinking that.
And and not that you want people to lift you up on some kind of pedestal, but also I think it really makes me feel good, and it makes me want to be closer to God when people say, man, that's just what I needed to hear today. And I think, if this was, came from your prayer time or whatever led you to say what you said or to seek me out or to do, you run into those things every so often. And you go, man, how cool is it that God used me to be a part of bringing just a little bit of joy or maybe a little bit of healing or some direction to someone. And it's just, to lose that just seems like a bigger tragedy, I think, than what we often may give it credit for.
Yeah.
But
I would just say in regards to that is whenever we hear those things, that's, whenever we hear something with, boy, I really needed that. I go back to the community again. And why did I get that?
Right.
And how does that actually contribute to my community? And I think we have to look in those terms and think in those terms that it's not just about what I can get, but also what I can give in that regard.
No, I think that's totally true, and I think it makes all that studying, that time with God. Not that it's not rewarding just personally, but maybe that goes to your point, Ken. Maybe we just don't have as much of a personal relationship, or it's as important as we think until it's shared with community. And then when someone says, hey, you guys have really been killing it with the podcast. I've really been finding meaning. I've been finding that I listen every week, and I can't wait to listen, and things like that. And you think, well, all the time that, you prepare in sermons and we prepare to talk and we try to open up to the Holy Spirit to just let people hear what he needs them to hear. And you go, man, again, that is just, to me, that is really cool that God can use imperfect Randy to do something good for somebody else. And then Shay said, thank you for having this discussion, Pastor Ken. It was the truth and it was needed. So I just wanted to make sure that you step out into politics from up front and, you're opening yourself up. And of course, WholeLife Church, you're probably in a pretty safe environment overall. But, just congrats, because I think that was, everyone appreciated that, and that came through multiple times in our questions. So, all right, let's see. One of our whole life reflections asked if a large part of believing God and being obedient to God means being kind, fair, and equitable to others. How are you doing at believing and being obedient? And so that, my friend, was where I really thought we came down to kind of the rubber meets the road. How are we doing? Because that kind of throws the challenge.
It is kind of a full circle. You started with an obedient question, and now we end with an obedient question.
And you get back to it,
yeah.
And you just kind of go, how am I doing if this means that it's just being kind and, man, life is busy and we're often too short with people. We don't spend enough time to, when we say, how you doing? We don't expect someone to actually go, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And a couple weeks ago, I had a pretty rough week. And Pastor Ken asked me how I was doing, and I was a bumbling fool for 10 minutes, and he hung out the whole time with me, and that meant the world to me. Somebody else who I didn't know, well, I know them, but didn't know they saw the whole thing, came up to me later on that night. It was downtown community, wanted to know when we could go out and hang out. And I don't know that we've ever done that before, even though we're pretty good friends. And this week, they're like, hey, we still haven't hung out yet.
Awesome.
So that's one of those.
That's
cool. One of those things where this community that we're talking about, and just how we treat everything, justice. And I know today we went into criminal justice, we went into all kinds of justice, but I think it's a good rounded conversation to just think about in all aspects. How are we doing? And then our final thoughts from Ken's message. I love this. He said, if we can't learn to talk to each other down here, meaning in earth and the church, to put the political designation by the side of your name and walk into here at church with your brothers and sisters, you're going to have a hard time walking in it. Family, can we agree to talk about last day events and understand that it's not political discussion, but biblical discussion, respectful discussion, and conversation with each other? Respectful discussion and conversation with politics at the center. Well, I finally thought we'd put away the velvet sledgehammer, but this week we unveiled the velvet anvil. So this week, watch out if you see the Roadrunner out there. You know he's not far behind with the anvil, and just stay away from him because he gets it every single time. So
There you go.
next week, what we're on to? We're still in the Old Testament, but we're
going to actually talk about specific societal justice that God put in place. So when we start talking about what God actually thought societal justice ought to look like, we're going to take a look at some very specific examples of what God thought should be happening.
Cool. I like the sounds of that. So we went from politics. Now we're gonna go to societal justice. Another cool thing. I don't think I don't think since we've been at WholeLife Church, I don't think my parents have ever been, maybe once, long time ago. It was a special event. I think it was a concert or something. My parents are coming to church with us this week.
Oh, there you go.
So they.
Now you've added some added pressure to me.
I know. I'm going to be like, see, I've been talking Ken up. Now we'll see how. See what happens. I think my mom listens to the podcast every so often. She'll comment, but I don't.
I know my mom does. Hey, Mom.
Hey, Mom. Mrs.
What episode numbers was this?
I'm glad you asked. It's 298.
Wow.
So we've got like
2 more
because we need to do something big. Did we get Cinderella's castle yet, or?
I asked Bernie, and he made some mention. Of course, he's in Kilimanjaro, so he's of no use to us right now. And he had mentioned someone's back porch that overlooks Disney and fireworks. So that's pretty close. Nathaniel did come up with a good idea. He said maybe we could go to DuckDuck Pro and use the green screen and see what if someone has some footage of that place. We could maybe.
We're going to do a live event, though, right?
I think we have to do.
We've got to do a live event.
So before this week is over, we'll come up with something,
with a plan,
and we'll come up with somewhere.
I feel like there's got to be food involved too.
I feel like there should be.
I mean, 300th episode, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's actually been in April. Will be 6 years that we've been doing the podcast.
6 years. Wow.
It's a pretty. The other day on LinkedIn, someone asked, "What's your how many episodes of a podcast have you done, and how long have you been doing it?" And when I put in, no, it wasn't. It was on. I'm sorry, it was Twitter, I believe. Anyway, and they're like 300. I'm like, how long have you been doing this? I'm like, it's weekly, and they're like, you've never missed a week, and I'm like, not one. We have a couple of bonus episodes, and we
didn't miss a week. You sure?
We've never missed a week. We did the 2 weeks I was in Hawaii.
Jeff, you've missed a couple weeks.
I know I've missed a lot of weeks.
When he says we, he's talking about himself.
That's what I'm thinking.
I missed a week.
But I'm thinking from the standpoint of even the podcast has always gone on. Man, you're better than the mailman.
We've never missed a deadline. And the 2 weeks I was in Hawaii, our old platform, it was not an automatic like we have now. I had to actually go in and load it. And,
you did.
And I had to put all the stuff.
I'm impressed.
It was.
We need to get you something golden for this.
Maybe we have some new microphones coming. Maybe we can
EIB microphone.
Oh no! Maybe we can dip these in some glitter.
Okay. There we go.
Glitter. There we go.
It probably
won't be good for them, but sure, why not?
That's probably within the budget to make that happen, so we'll go with that. But if you come up with something last minute that's just like, hey, this is a cool idea, or hey, guess what? I've got 3 grills, and we can grill veggies and hot dogs and veggie dogs and everything else with a great view of the ocean, or downtown Orlando,
and our 5,000 fans that will flock to.
You're going to have to have parking, I think.
Yeah, parking.
And maybe validate.
Event parking.
Yeah, maybe valet. I don't know.
How many people showed up at our last live event?
I think we had about 25 to come through total, 25 or 30. And so, and that was kind of got switched. At least we were close to where we were supposed to be. But anyway, so if you come up with another idea, if not, we're just going to do something, and then we will invite you all and invite friends and all that good stuff. And so that will do it. That's next week is 299 and then 300. That's it.
All right.
So thanks for listening. As always, send in your questions, comments, and have a great week.